then we can go back through, where else has this person been in New York? Remember, this is all the New York Times signals, the same people who said this is impossible. And once you, stop right there. And then once you get here and we've linked all of these signals together, and we've linked their locations together, their times together, we can then build what we call a pattern of life. And as that pattern of life emerges, so then we can track that individual or track that unique device ID. And boom. There you go. That's how we do what we do. That's one of the ways. So this technology is common for Sheriff Lamb and some of the work that they do. It's common with Craig Sawyer and some of the work he does. And having the ability to do this and do this at scale is extremely difficult. They had 50 billion pings or signals. We had 10 trillion signals. So scaling all of this was super important. We also recognized, because we've been around for a while, that the haters would ultimately come out. And so we established several different locations from which we were doing our research that proved to be providential. The day that the movie was released, Mississippi State University, because they received some banging around from the AP in open records, wondering what we were doing in our office there, canceled our lease. It's all right though. They fell into our trap. We weren't doing this work there. We were storing some data there, but we weren't doing the actual analysis, and they canceled us for no reason. Conceptually, this then is, I think, a little bit easier to understand. We geofence, if you will, around drop boxes. We geofence around known or any the places we've been advised that might be trafficking ballots, like nonprofits and the like. And then we build the patterns of life around these people. And as we begin to aggregate it, we start skinnying it down. We had millions of unique devices. And as we began to skinny it down in Maricopa and in Yuma County, in particular, you begin to see where and when an individual device intersects with the fence around that box. One of the most important things to understand is the difference between accuracy and precision. I've not seen one article from anyone that adequately or properly defines it, but it's an important distinction. Accuracy in this instance really is the accuracy of the actual signal itself. Like how likely is it that from a risk perspective that any one individual signal is off the mark a little bit. There's been a lot of noise out there that you can only get within 40 feet or some idiocy, it's just crazy. So what we did was what we do is we take 3 different types of signals and we buy them from different brokers that catalog them from different devices, but yet still stamped with the when and the where, the when to the where, and then we identify the individual device ID to the who. And that gives us, on an individual basis, the ability to make a decision. Is this ping accurate? How close is this? My phone here or is it here? The differential or the methods in which we smooth that out or we tease that out are proprietary, but they are incredibly accurate. The United States government, the United States military can measure down to within 2 centimeters. So the very idea that, I think somebody wrote, the New York Times or someone wrote, well, you can tell that they're walking down the street, but you can't see which side of the street they're on. utter nonsense. It's complete nonsense. They're asking the wrong questions. They're asking the wrong people. And these articles are being written by journalistic terrorists.
Can you repeat that last line?
Yeah, the articles are being written by journalistic terrorists, of which I think there's probably one or two in this room.
I just wanted to make sure everybody heard that.
This quote that's up on the screen here, and I don't have my glasses on, so I'm going to let Catherine read it. Go.
You want to pull that to you? So this is we became very familiar with this court case. This was heard at the Supreme Court, and this was the majority opinion written by Chief Justice Roberts. And the case was Carpenter v. U.S., and it was taking a look at privacy issues around the use of this type of data. And in that case, they very clearly defined what citizens and the sort of a civilian use of this type of data can be, and what government and law enforcement can use relative to this data. And so we used that as a guideline because we wanted to make sure that we were tried to be so conscientious about creating a data set that would be useful for law enforcement, but that wouldn't cross over any lines because there's so much that's available. We wanted to make sure that we were properly composing everything. But this is an important quote, and Greg, since you don't have your glasses, I'll read it to you. When the government tracks the location of a cell phone...
It's really a trick. I can read it. She just...
When the government tracks the location of a cell phone, it achieves near-perfect surveillance, as if it had attached an ankle monitor to the phone's user. Now look, we also, just as a practical matter, I understand that's a pretty creepy thought. But friends, it's happening. It's happening on all of our phones, which are attached to us at almost all times. And so our choice to use commercially available data to point out the exploitation of a certain element of our electoral process was done in a way that law enforcement can use it, that respects the privacy of all parties involved. But it was the way to prove that election fraud is real. And for that reason, this data was a critical element. And frankly, when we started the project, we didn't know. I mean, maybe we would have done this and found nothing. And that'd have been okay. Check that box. There was no exploitation. But as many of you, I'm sure, have heard, we began to think through what is a realistic expectation or a realistic threshold for when going to a Dropbox too many times is really too many times. Is it twice? Is it 3 times? Is it 4 times? Is it 5 times? Because we wanted to focus on a very clear, narrow data set that showed what we would consider sort of this extreme outlier behavior. And ultimately, we settled on 10 times. The devices that we focused in on went to Dropboxes 10 or more times. And here in Arizona, they went an average of 21 times. The importance of this is when you think about data think about it like a bell curve, right? Most of our lives are really like a bell curve. If you think about the preponderance of the population coming right in that sweet spot, that heart of the curve, we're talking about an outlier group on the far right of the scale. There's no other explanation, and we can get into the statistical probabilities around why this is true. We can get into the quality control around why we know what we did is accurate, and we are glad to do that in any level of depth. But suffice for this purpose and for this time to say, the outlier population set, the outlier set was so extreme that it warrants very serious consideration, and it's one of the things that we hope that this body before us will take into consideration. So here's what the Arizona data set looked like. we had over 1 trillion mobile device signals. And Greg, you want to describe what a signal or a ping is?
Yeah, your phone, those numbers, or those, when you pulled up those numbers earlier, and depending on what you're doing on your phone, it sends different signals for different things. Like if occasionally you might be out and you get an Amber Alert or something like that, how do they get it to your phone? Well, that's how they get it to your phone. What's interesting about this situation is that once we know a device ID, we not only can track that device ID, but we can communicate with that device. And it's for the same reason. Just like if you're in Spain and you're out for a walk on the Camino de Santiago and Catherine calls you and says, "Where are you?" And it finds you out on the Camino, and that's how it finds you. The web of signals are so significant, and your phone is sending regular pings to say, "Hey, here I am. I'm in Leon," or whatever. Is how all that comes together. So the import of the number of these pings, it can't be overstated how important it is to not do what the New York Times did, to not just say we've got 50 billion pings and we're going to make all these assumptions that President Trump happens to be driving from here to here. My guess is they did exactly what the Department of Justice did to the January 6 participants, and that was get Google data only. The challenge with getting Google data only, I think the court has acknowledged, I think, close to 50 people that are in jails to this day because of this. But the import of having multiple signals from which to operate, and then their origin coming from multiple places, whether it be your app or whether it be just a phone signal that's sending out, "Hey, here I am," could be a different set of signals from Wi-Fi or from Bluetooth, or somebody was telling me earlier that they found one of their ear pods that they had lost in a restaurant, and they didn't find it until they came back to the same restaurant like a week or so later, and that was from a Bluetooth signal that was being sent. And so there are all sorts of different signals that are aggregated out there. Bringing them together and then cleansing them in such a way that you do tease out these outliers, and we are able to assure you that we're not including false positives. There's an inordinate amount of time is spent by my team living to my commitment to Catherine that you can't be wrong. And so we take people out. We started, in fact, once we got to the bottom of the pile, we ended up with 279. And as we went through every single one of them, I think 30 or so of them in Atlanta, for example, we had to kick out 40 here in Phoenix. Because there wasn't enough cohesion between the signals, and as our algorithms began to try to satisfy the challenges that it was facing and tried to marry them up, rather than just, that one looks close enough, let's go with it, we kicked it out.
Yeah.
So that's how we got down to the numbers that we got down to. The biggest challenge, Catherine, you want to move to the next one?
Well, yes.
Oh, you're going to have to do all these. Go ahead.
So this is a look at what we ultimately resolved here in Arizona. And I want to make one other point about how we started in the process, because there's much being said now, again, going back to Greg's point on accuracy, but there's this lingering number. When we first started with the presentation of this data to law enforcement, it was in early 2021. And we really thought that if we provided what we believe to be a predicate for investigation early in the process, that law enforcement, with the resources that are available to them, would be able to refine that data set and do what was necessary to move it forward. In no way was our work done, but it is unfortunately where some of the holdovers that you now may read in the press suggest that we only got to 100 feet, within 100 feet of a drop box. And we're going to talk about that here in a bit. But think about it like a funnel. You start at the top and you begin to, as you saw the number of devices that we first began to look at, how many went, and the dynamic is, and I'm not sure that we explained this yet, but the dynamic exists between the phones and the drop boxes by way of what's called a geofence. And so we put a geofence around the drop boxes, which is like a digital coordinate set, and then we measured how many times an individual device went through that fence. Again, remembering that we kept our thresholds very high, and then the proximity of those devices to the drop boxes became tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter over time.
And if I could just add that we use that data to exclude, not to include. So if let's say the Dropbox is that podium there, and I'm here, and it might take me, 3 seconds to walk over there and then walk back, even though we can measure inertia and we can measure movement inside of those pings based on how close they are together, if for some reason there's not a signal while you're in the box, then that visit would be excluded. So we don't use it to include, we use it to exclude. And that's key to the establishment of the rest of that equation I mentioned a moment ago. And that was the difference between accuracy of an individual ping and precision in a set of pings. So precision would refer more to how they operate together, how they look together. Some that might be teased out because they don't have the adequate information. Maybe we replace it with another one of the 3 data sets, and we push all this together into a formula or a calculation that is designed to exclude, to ensure that we don't include false positives. But it also helps us in not excluding false negatives. So we don't want to include anyone who shouldn't be, and we do want to include, and we did that for every single visit, for every single one of these.